Hi, this is George Gillis, and this is 12 Mindset Tips for Improved Performance. Tip number 1. Before we get into that, just want to make a really important point for you. My hope and desire here is that you take these tips that we're providing and integrate them and use them in your life and use them in your business world. And please keep in mind, practice doesn't make perfect. That's a really dangerous concept, because if you're practicing something wrong, then what you're going to get is a very wrong habit. Practice really just makes habits. Perfect practice makes perfect. So if you're in business or in sales, practice these ideas on situations where you don't have anything to risk, you don't have anything to lose, okay? And where there's no important outcome on the line. And practice them without the pressure of having to make a sale or closing the deal. And then you start to get used to them, you start to become familiar, they become unconscious and fully integrated, and then you'll start to see the power. So the first tip of presupposition here of NLP that we're going to start with is respect for the other person's model of the world. And I like this graphic because if you look at this, both people are looking at a globe. They're looking at a model of the world. They're looking at exactly the same thing. Yet I think you'll agree their perspective of that globe is going to be completely different. One is looking at it from the west, one is looking at it from the east. One is looking more closely, one is looking down from the north. So while we can be looking at the same thing and evaluating the same thing, our model of the world is going to be very, very different because we all process information differently. Think back to that NLP model of communication where data is coming in through visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or a smell, or something that we say to ourselves, whatever it may be. And then it goes through that entire internal process to form a perception, to form an internal image. And then we get a behavior. Then we give meaning to it first, and then we get a behavior. And a simple way to understand this is if you think about, eyewitnesses to an accident. 4 or 5 people see an accident, the police interview all of them, and they're going to get 4 or 5 different stories. Rarely are people going to see exactly the same thing, and even when they do, it's from a slightly different perspective. So respecting that, however, that another person has a different model of the world or a different view of the world doesn't mean that we have to accept their model of the world. But without respect, communication, I think you'll agree, is grossly diminished. Have you ever felt disrespected by a person? I mean, this term, disrespected, I don't even know if it's proper English anymore, but now it has become shortened to dissed. I've been dissed. You've been dissed. This whole idea of being disrespected limits communication. And you think about communication, it's a two-way process. We're going to get into that in a little bit more detail further down the line. But to influence and persuade and communicate with somebody, they have to feel that you are respecting their view of the world. And think back to communications and conversations that you've had. Have you ever not respected somebody else's view? Have you ever not respected how they see the world? And have you noticed that they start to feel like you don't respect them? Has it ever happened to you? Have you ever been on the receiving end of someone who you felt has not respected you? Well, how likely are you to change your behavior or listen to their ideas if you feel like you're not being respected? So, how effectively can you communicate or influence without respect? I think the answer is very, very little. One of the things that you can do that will help to change your processing of how other people are behaving and what they're doing and how they view the world is to stop thinking in terms of why do they think that? Why do they say that? Why are they doing that? Why is this behavior happening? But think in terms of how do they do that? How do they have that response? How do they say the things that they're saying? How do they back off or come forward? How do they do that? Question the process of how rather than why. When you start thinking in terms of how do they do things, you start to get a different perspective because you're not questioning them, you're questioning the process, and it makes it less personal. And you can still respect their view of the world and maybe even understand it a little bit more when you start thinking to yourself, how do they do that? So in a sales situation, if you're in a communication with somebody and they start backing off, rather than thinking why, how, what happened in the past that caused them to respond in such a way, okay, what's the process that's happening in their mind, okay? Do you understand that people see the world differently, okay? Do I understand that they see the world through their eyes, their experiences, their present state, and that it's different than how you see the world at that given moment? And when you start to accept this and understand this, then you could take it to the next step and start thinking about what can I say or how can I act so that the other person feels safe in expressing their views, even though their views may be different than mine. Now think about in our culture today, you don't have to look too far to get conflicting views. And I'm not going to get into any kind of political discussion here or economic discussion, but you think about immigration, you think about all these things, and there are diametrically opposed views. But isn't it refreshing when you can meet somebody who doesn't take it personally, even if their views are opposite than yours? And you can sit down and have an intelligent dialogue. You can sit down and have an intelligent conversation without making it personal. So how do they think that way rather than why makes it a lot easier. Can you engage in a conversation with somebody who has opposing views to an emotionally charged topic and understand how they might think that way without accepting that as your point of view? Now think in terms of sales. Think in terms of business. When you're sitting with someone and you're trying to get them to buy into your concept, product, service, or idea, and they might have a different view of the world than you do, what would happen? Could you imagine if you start to understand how they view the world and start to try to see the world through their eyes, from their perspective, and then introduce your product, service, idea, concept, whatever it may be, into their world through their point of view? This takes a great degree of flexibility. It takes a higher level of thinking. And the effects are very, very powerful. So can you ask enough deep, probing questions, intelligent, well thought out questions based on what they're saying to you, so that you can start to understand their point of view, understand how they see the world? And when you do, can you imagine, because you want to be better at what you do, that this will give you the edge to help them make the decision to come on board or buy your service or buy your product, or to simply accept your ideas? This is just the first of 12 tips, mindset tips for improved performance, respecting the other person's of the world, the other person's model of the world, And for more information on NLP and communication, influence, persuasion in business and in sales, see my website at georgegillis.com. You can always contact me at george@georgegillis.com or call me at 602-527-0142. Thanks for your interest and your attention, and I hope you found this information valuable, and we'll see you again on the next one.